My mother waited until the dessert plates were down before she slid the papers across the table and gave me 14 days to end my engagement. She did it the way she did everything, quietly, between the coffee and the pie, on a Sunday in October, in the dining room where I had eaten every Sunday dinner of my life. The papers were stapled at the corner. Somebody had gone through them with those little yellow flags you buy in a pack of 500, and there were exactly 3 flags sticking out of the side. I know there were 3 because I counted them while she was still talking. Every one of them marked a page with my name on it. She told me it was an amendment to her trust. She said Curtis Mabry had already drafted it. She said all it needed was her signature and a witness. And Curtis kept a witness on staff. Then she told me what it would take to keep my name where it was. I had to stop seeing Ezra, not slow down, not think about it, not take some time apart to be sure. Stop. She wanted it finished by the end of the month, and she wanted me to have dinner with Bennett Calloway before Thanksgiving, and she wanted me to go into that dinner with an open mind, which is a phrase she used for years to mean an obedient one. 14 days to decide. I remember the room getting very specific. The coffee had gone cold in the pot and you could smell that it had. The radiator under the window clicked twice the way it always did when the heat kicked on. My fork was still lying across my plate with a bite of pie on it that I never ate. I remember thinking that I should say something, and then thinking that I had nothing to say that she had not already decided the answer to. Because here is what you need to understand about that stack of paper. It was not a threat. My mother did not make threats. Threats are what you make when you are hoping the other person folds, so you do not have to go through with it. Those pages were already drafted. Those flags were already placed. She had called her attorney, sat down with him, gone through the document page by page, and marked every place where I would be removed. She did all of that before she invited me to dinner. She had the whole thing sitting in her handbag in the front hall while she asked me how the church restoration was going, and whether the roof beams were as bad as I had feared. She was not asking me to choose. She was telling me what she had already built, and offering me 14 days to walk into it or out of it. I want to be fair to her, so I will say this. She never raised her voice. Not once in my entire childhood did my mother raise her voice. She did not need to. When you can remove a person from a document, you never have to shout. And I knew she would go through with it because I had watched her do it before. My brother Theo sat in that same chair, the one with the seams split along the back that she kept meaning to have reupholstered. He was 20 years old, and he told her he was not going to law school, and he was moving to Oregon with a friend and a truck that needed a new clutch. She did not argue with him. She waited until he was out the door, and then she made 3 phone calls that same night. And by the following weekend, everyone in the family knew that Theo had made his choice, and there would be no undoing it. He got nothing. Not when he called at Christmas the first year. Not when he stopped calling the second year. 16 years later, he still had nothing. And she still told people at parties that she only had the one daughter. So no, I did not think she was bluffing. I drove home that night with the heater on too high and my hands at 10 and 2 like a student driver. Ezra was still up when I came in, sanding a scroll at the bench under the window with the little lamp pulled down close. He asked me how it went. I told him it went fine. That was the first lie I told him, and it was the last one. For 13 days after that, I did not call my mother. I did not call Curtis Mabry. I did not call Bennett Calloway, whose number she had texted me the next morning without any message attached to it. Just 10 digits sitting there on my screen like a receipt. I went to work. I measured a barrel vault that had been sagging since 1942. I ate lunch in my car. I let the phone ring. And on the 14th day, I drove back to my mother's house in Shaker Heights, and I put something down on that same dining room table, and I pushed it across to her side. She had not planned for that one. She had planned for everything else. To understand why a 37-year-old woman sat still for that, you have to understand how the money worked in our house. We lived in Shaker Heights because of the name. My mother said it out loud once, at a dinner party, when she thought I was upstairs. Somebody asked why she had picked that street, and she said that when people hear where you live, they stop asking who you are. I went to a private school on the east side because the Greaves boys went there and the Callaways went there. I found that out at 16, from a woman at a fundraiser who assumed I already knew. My mother had never mentioned it. She just handed me a uniform when I was 11 and told me I would like it. And then there was the night the family decided what I would do with my life. I was 17. It was a Sunday. Of course it was a Sunday. And my mother had my father and my Aunt Bobby at the table. And she announced that I was going to study architecture. Not asked. Announced. She had already spoken to a man at her club whose firm did historic work. She had already looked at 3 programs. She said it the way you say a thing that has been settled for months. Here is the part I have never been able to explain cleanly to anyone. I wanted it. I had wanted it since I was 14, and my father took me through a mill on the flats that was being torn down. And I stood under a 100-year-old timber truss and could not stop looking up at it. That was mine. Nobody gave me that, but she said it out loud first. And once she said it out loud first, I could never get it back. For about 10 years, I could not tell whether I loved my work or whether I loved being approved of. And those 2 things feel identical from the inside. I did not sort it out until I was almost 30, on a job site, alone, with a flashlight and a cracked keystone and nobody there to be proud of me. That is what she took. Not money. Money is easy to name. She took the ability to know whether a thing was mine. My father was Nolan Kessler, and he ran a press for a printing company off Carnegie for 26 years. He came home smelling like ink and machine oil, and he had a permanent black line under 2 of his fingernails that never came out, no matter what he scrubbed with, while he was alive. Money was quiet in our house. It was there. Everybody could see it was there. But it did not get discussed at the table, and it did not get used as a lever. And I think now that was because he was standing in the way of it. He died the winter I was 19. His heart. On a Tuesday. At work. And the man who found him was a pressman named Dale, who cried at the funeral harder than any of us did. After that, money became the only language my mother spoke. Within a year, she had opinions about my roommates. Within 2, she had opinions about who I dated, and the opinions came with numbers attached to them. There is one more thing from that winter. The week after the funeral, she had me cleaning out the basement, because that is what she did with grief. She handed people tasks. I was going through shelves, and I found a tin box behind a stack of my father's paint cans. Old fruit cake tin, the kind with a hunting scene on the lid. Inside there was a hand plane, a wooden one, not the metal kind, with the handle worn down, smooth and pale on one side where somebody's palm had been. And underneath it there was an envelope, and the envelope had a date written on the front in pen, 1979. My mother came down the stairs while I was holding it. She crossed that basement faster than I had ever seen her move. She took the tin out of my hands, put the lid back on, and told me it was my grandfather's and it was not mine to go through. Her voice did not change at all. Her hands did, though. I watched her hands. I put the paint cans back and I did not ask. For 18 years, I did not ask. And Theo was already gone by then. 2 years gone. I had watched him stand in the front hall with a duffel bag and tell her he was not doing it. And I had watched her let him walk out without a single word. And then I had listened through the floor while she made her calls that night. She used the word ungrateful 3 separate times. I counted that too. Apparently, I have always counted things. So I learned what my brother did not learn. And I learned it well. If you are quiet, you get to stay. That was the whole education. Be pleasant. Be excellent. Be seen at the right places. And do not ever put anything on the table that she has not already approved, and you will keep your name where it is. I ran on that for almost 20 years. It worked, too. Right up until I met a man who fixed instruments for a living. I met Ezra Vance inside a church that was falling down. St. Ambrose, off Fulton, built in 1891, closed for 11 years, and my firm had been brought in to see whether anything under the plaster was worth saving. I was up on staging with a moisture meter when somebody down in the nave started tapping on the pew ends, one after another, working his way down the row like a man checking melons. He had been hired to rebuild the pews and the organ case. He did not know what a moisture meter was, and then he asked me something nobody in 11 years of that job had ever asked me. He wanted to know if I could tell from the grain which side of the tree the pewbacks had come from. I could not. He could. He showed me on the third pew from the front, where the growth rings ran tight on one edge and loose on the other, and he said the tight side had faced north into the wind, and that the wood remembered it 130 years later. I thought about that for a week. He builds and restores stringed instruments, violins, violas, the occasional cello somebody's grandmother left in an attic. He has a shop on the west side with a wall of clamps and a bench his own grandfather worked at. A hand-built violin takes him around 200 hours, and he does not make many of them, because most of the money is in restoration and setup work, and he is honest about that. He teaches 2 students on Saturdays. He has never once been late on a payment in his life. That was the man. That was the whole crime. I kept him a secret for 6 months. I told my mother I was buried in the St. Ambrose job. I told her I was too tired for the Rutherford dinner and too tired for the Christmas thing at the club. I saw him on weekends and I called it seeing friends. And then I would drive home from his shop with sawdust on my coat and brush it off in the driveway before I went inside my own house, which is a thing I did not examine at the time. He knew. Of course he knew. A man who can read a 130-year-old pew can read a woman brushing her coat off. He asked me about it exactly once, in February, sitting on the tailgate of his truck outside the shop. He did not accuse me of anything. He said he was not going anywhere, and he was not going to push, and he only wanted to know one thing, which was whether I was planning to tell her, or whether I was planning to just keep going like this. I said I would tell her, and I meant it when I said it. I just kept not doing it. She found out in April, and there was nothing clever about how... My mother has never needed to be clever. She has a network. A woman she knows from the garden committee saw the 2 of us at a place on Detroit Avenue and described him to her later. And the description was 3 words long, and one of those words was hands. She called me that night at 9:40 she asked what he did. I told her the truth, and I told it plainly, because I had spent 6 months lying and I was tired in a way that sleep does not fix. I said his name was Ezra Vance, that he built and repaired instruments, that we had been together since October, and that I was happy. She was quiet for about 3 seconds. Then she said no. Just that. The way you decline a second helping. She told me she had someone in mind and had for some time. Bennett Calloway, 42, Marion Calloway's son. And he had come back to Cleveland from the fund he worked for in Chicago, and he was, in her words, at the right stage. She described him the way you describe a listing. Square footage, schools, taxes, a little work needed, but good bones. I told her I was in love with somebody. She told me that love is the cheapest thing in the world because everybody has some, and that security is expensive because almost nobody does. She said Ezra could not give me the life I had been raised for. She said it the way she said everything, in a completely level voice, like she was reading off a card. I said his shop cleared enough to live on. I said he owned it outright. She said that was not the point, and we both knew it. And for once, she was right about something, because it never had been the point. The point was that at a table full of her friends, there would be a moment where somebody asked what my husband did, and there would be an answer she could not use. That call was on a Wednesday. The Sunday dinner with the stack of papers and the 3 yellow flags was 4 days later. 13 days is a strange amount of time, long enough to think, not long enough to become a different person. I did not tell Ezra about the papers. I knew that if I told him, he would say the right thing. And then for the rest of my life, I would not be able to tell whether I had chosen him or whether he had talked me into it. So I carried it by myself and went to work. On the 9th day, I was up on a lift at St. Ambrose taking measurements on the barrel vault over the nave, because there was a sag in it, and the client wanted to know how bad. That vault had been out of true since about 1942, going by the patchwork, and it had been sagging there for 80-some years without dropping a chip of plaster on anybody's head. I sat up on that lift a long time with my tape hanging off my hand. Something can be bent and still be holding. That is not a nice thought. It is just a true one, and I needed a true one that week. On the 11th day, I called my brother. We were down to about 4 calls a year by then, mostly on birthdays. He picked up on the second ring with a shop compressor kicking in behind him. He services commercial ovens for restaurants and hospitals out in Portland, and he got there with no help from anybody. I told him everything. It took 19 minutes. He did not give me advice. He never has, and I understand now that it is because somebody did that to him at 20, and he decided he was not going to be that. He told me what his first year had actually been like. The apartment over the laundromat with the space heater, selling the truck. The Christmas he sat in a parking lot and called the house and hung up before it rang, twice. And then he said the only thing that mattered. He said losing it did not kill him. He said it was bad for a long time, and it did not kill him, and he was 34 years old with a life she had nothing to do with. And it was his. I did not sleep much the last 2 nights. On the 14th day, I drove to Shaker Heights. She had the front room lit, and there were 2 cups on the tray, which told me everything about what she was expecting. She thought I was coming to fold. She had made the good tea. She was wearing the gray she wore for occasions. I did not sit down. I took a checkbook out of my bag and set it on the dining room table. It was the one she gave me the summer I turned 22, from the account she opened in my name, and it was full, every check still in it, 15 years, and I had never torn one out, because I had always known what the first one would cost me. I set the supplemental card next to it, then the key to the condominium on Van Aken that had my name on the lease and her name on the deed. And then I pushed all 3 across the table, in the same direction the papers had come at me 2 weeks before. I told her to keep it. All of it. I told her to call Curtis Mabry in the morning and sign whatever she wanted to sign, and that she did not need to wait until the end of the month, and that I was marrying Ezra Vance either way. She asked me if I understood what I was giving up. I said I did. I said I had understood it since I was 17, which is why I had done everything she asked for 20 years, and that the giving up had already happened, a little at a time, and she had simply never had to look at the bill. She told me I would remember this night. She was right about that, too. I got as far as the car, and then I sat in her driveway with my hands on the wheel and waited for the floor to come out from under me. I had been braced for it my whole life. That was the thing she held over the table at every dinner since I was 11 years old. It did not come. What came was quiet. She had fired the only round she had, and I was still sitting there, still breathing, still employed, still in love. You cannot threaten a person with something that has already happened to them. I want to be honest about the 2 years that came after, because I have heard people tell this kind of story like the sun came out the next morning. It was tight for about 8 months. We got married at the courthouse downtown with 9 people there, and Bobby was one of them. And afterward, Ezra's old teacher played something in the parking lot on a fiddle he had rebuilt. We bought a small house in Lakewood with a bad porch. I made lead on the restoration team. Ezra picked up the contract to rework the string instruments for a chamber orchestra downtown, which is the closest thing to a lottery ticket the trade has. Theo and I started talking every month instead of 4 times a year. And my mother did not call, not once, in 2 years. But she talked. Bobby told me later what the version at the club was, and the version was that her daughter had thrown away her family for a man who works with his hands. The phone rang at 11:47 on a Tuesday night in March. I was in bed with a set of drawings on my knees. Ezra was at the bench in the corner scraping a top plate, holding it up to the light every few passes. I almost let it go to voicemail. It was my Aunt Bobby, and her voice was coming out in pieces. She said Vivian had gone down in her bathroom after dinner and the ambulance took her to Lakeside General. She said it was her heart, and the man on the phone had used the word critical. She kept apologizing for calling so late, over and over, like that was the problem. I wrote the room number on the back of a hardware store receipt because it was the only paper on the nightstand. 612. My handwriting came out like somebody else's. Ezra was already standing. He had put the plate down on a rag, which he never does. He always puts it in the case. He did not ask if I wanted to go. He found my shoes and my coat, and he was in the truck with the engine running before I got the door locked. He turned the seat heater on, just mine, not his, and it was not cold enough out to need it. And neither of us said anything about it the whole way there. The parking garage at Lakeside smells like every parking garage. Cold concrete and old exhaust. We took the elevator to 6, and the cardiac floor had that light they use at night, the kind that is somehow too bright and too gray at the same time. I gave the name at the station, and a woman there tipped her chin toward the far end of the corridor. I stopped about 15 feet short of the door. Ezra stopped with me and did not say anything. There was a window in that door, and through it I could see her. She had 4 machines going around the bed, and I counted all 4 before I could make myself move. Her hair was down. I had never in 37 years seen my mother with her hair down outside her own bathroom. It was loose on the pillow, thinner than I remembered, almost white at the front. She was in a gown with ties at the shoulder, and her rings were gone. Somebody had put them in a bag. She looked small. That was the part I was not ready for. My mother had never once been small. Ezra touched my shoulder and asked if I wanted another minute. I said no, and then I had to tell my feet twice before they went. Her eyes were closed when I came in. Then they opened, and she turned her head, and I watched her face do something I had never seen it do, which was to be caught completely off guard. I got about 3 steps in, and the first thing my mother said to me, after 2 years, in that room, with those machines on her, was to ask me where I had been. Not hello, not thank you for coming, an accusation with a question mark stapled to the end of it, delivered as if I were the one who had made 3 phone calls in one night, as if I were the one who had stopped speaking, as if I had wandered off somewhere and only just turned up. My jaw locked. I felt it happen. I kept my voice flat, and I told her I was here now, and I asked her what the doctors had said. She looked at me for a while, deciding. I could see her running the numbers on whether to push the guilt or take what was on offer. She took what was on offer. The doctor came in around midnight, young, tired, a coffee stain on his coat. He asked if I was family, and I said I was her daughter. Valve failure, he said, and the muscle was doing too much work to compensate. Surgery within a few days, months of recovery. She would not be able to manage the house alone afterward. I asked what a few days meant, and what the recovery looked like week by week, and who does the follow-up? I typed it all into my phone while my mother watched me from that bed, looking for a sign, either one, total devotion or the door. I gave her neither. I just took notes. I ran into Harold Greaves by the vending machines on my way out. He has known my mother since before I was born, and he had clearly been sitting in that waiting area, building up to this. He said my name and came at me with his hand out like we were at a wedding. He said, "Family is everything." He said she is sick and frightened, and this is my chance to make it right. He said blood is thicker than water. I told him the whole line is longer than that. It goes, "The blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb," and it means close to the opposite of what he had just used it for. The bond you choose outweighs the one you were born into. People have been chopping that sentence in half for 100 years to make it mean stay put. He blinked at me. Then I asked him one question. I asked him how many times he had called her in the last 2 years. He did not have a number for me. I said that was interesting because I had one for him and it was 0. And she was the one who had made it 0. And he had never once asked her why. Then I went to see my mother. I settled into a rhythm that first week. Tuesday evenings after sight. Saturday mornings before it got busy. Twice a week, an hour each time. It was not enough. I knew that by the second visit, when she thanked me for coming and then mentioned, to the window, that Marion Calloway's daughter had stayed 4 nights straight when Marion had her hip done. That is how it works. She never asks. She just puts another woman's daughter on the table and lets you sit with it. Curtis Mabry called me Thursday morning, the day before the surgery, while I was standing on scaffolding with a respirator around my neck. He was polite about it. He is not a bad man. He is a man following instructions. He said my mother had asked him to prepare a restatement of her trust, and he needed to schedule a signing at the hospital. And because she was an inpatient, he would bring a physician's letter confirming capacity dated the same day. So nobody could argue later that she had not been in her right mind. I stood there with the wind coming through the scaffolding. She was not confused. She was not fogged in on medication. She was 30 hours out from having her chest opened, arranging paperwork, and arranging it carefully enough that it would hold up. She could not simply be sick. She could not let me sit in a chair next to her and be her daughter. Everything had to be a ledger. I told Curtis I would not discuss her estate while she was going into surgery. He said he understood, and he said it kindly, and he called back 9 days later anyway because that is his job. My work started slipping in ways I could measure. I read the same paragraph of a conditions report 4 times and could not have told you what it said. I missed a filing window on a landmarks application by 2 days, which I have never done. In a client meeting, I got asked about the schedule and I had nothing. Just nothing. My boss covered it, then found me at my desk afterward and asked if everything was all right at home, which is what people say when they mean something else. And then I did the thing I am least proud of in this entire story. I came home on a Thursday and Ezra had made dinner and left the grocery bags on the counter. And I snapped at him about the bags. Not about the hospital, not about Curtis Mabry. About paper bags. He put the knife down on the board. The kitchen got very quiet except for something going in a pot behind him. He said he had watched me come home wrung out twice a week for a month and he was worried. I told him I had it under control. He said I did not. He said my mother had spent 30 years steering me with money, and when the money stopped working, she switched over to guilt, and it was working better than the money ever had. He said I was letting her drive with a different set of keys. I said something sharp about how easy that must be to see from the outside, and that is when he told me, a week before that Sunday dinner, my mother had come to his shop. Middle of a weekday. She was polite. She looked at his wall of clamps and asked 1 or 2 intelligent questions about the bench, because she is intelligent. That was never the problem. Then she took out her checkbook, set it on his workbench, on the wood, and asked him what number it would take for him to be gone from my life by the end of the month. He said no. She wrote 1 anyway, and she tore it out, and she left it sitting there face up next to a jar of pegs. He said he stood there for a while after her car pulled out. Then he tore it into quarters and put it in the stove. And he did not tell me, not that week, not the week of the papers, not in the 2 years since. I asked him why. My voice did not come out right. He said that if I had known, on that Sunday, that she had tried to buy him, then I would not have been choosing him. I would have been choosing against her. And he said he had waited his whole life to be picked on purpose, and he was not going to take it any other way, not even that once. I sat down on the kitchen floor with my back against the dishwasher. 2 years rearranged themselves in about 30 seconds. I had told myself there was a floor somewhere, and she had at least stayed above it. There was no floor. She had already been to his shop. She had already put a number on his back. And then she came to Sunday dinner and asked me about roof beams and passed the pie, and she was lying in a bed on the 6th floor of Lakeside General right now, waiting for me to soften. I saw Dahlia Okonjo in the hallway the next night. She runs nights on that floor. And she had changed my mother's dressing every evening I had been there without ever saying one unnecessary word to me. She stopped with her cart and told me something I had not asked for. She said that after midnight on a cardiac floor, everybody calls a name. Almost every night. Almost every shift. And in 19 years she has learned one thing about it. The name people call is usually not the name of the person they treated best. Then she said goodnight and pushed the cart down the hall. Theo flew in on a Thursday. I picked him up at the airport with one bag and a jacket that was not warm enough for Ohio in March. We did not talk much on the drive. There is no small talk for where we were going. He had not been in a room with our mother in 16 years. When we walked in together, her face went through 3 things in about 3 seconds. Surprise, then something that looked like fear, which I had never seen on her. Then something underneath that I could not name and still cannot. Her 2 removed children, standing at the end of the bed. Theo greeted her by name and asked what the doctors were telling her. She said she was tired. Nobody said anything for about a minute and a half, and I know because I watched the clock. Then she asked him what he did for work now. He told her commercial ovens, mostly hospitals and university kitchens, his own truck. 2 men working for him. She listened all the way through without one comment, which for my mother is the equivalent of applause. We stayed 40 minutes. In the elevator going down, Theo said that was harder than he expected, and also better. Both at once. 3 days after her surgery, she crashed. I was in the room when the numbers on the monitor started going the wrong way. 2 nurses came in fast and a third right behind them. And somebody put a hand on my arm and moved me into the hall, and the door closed. 22 minutes. Theo and I stood in that hallway and did not sit down once. And somewhere in there we started talking for the first time in our lives. About that house. About how he had always thought I had it easy, and I had always thought he had it easy. And it had never once occurred to either of us that she had arranged it that way on purpose. The doctor came out and said she had stabilized, and that the next day would tell us more. Aunt Bobby showed up that evening with a paper bag from her car. She said Vivian had given it to her 3 weeks earlier, with instructions that if things went badly, Bobby was to give it to me and not open it herself. Inside was the fruitcake tin with the hunting scene on the lid. I had not seen it in 18 years, and my hands knew it before my head did. The handplane was in there, and underneath it, the envelope with 1979 on the front. I read it in the family lounge at the end of the hall with the vending machine humming behind me. It was from my grandfather, Emmett Doyle, 4 paragraphs, typed on the letterhead of the construction company he owned by then, signed with a fountain pen. He was writing to his daughter, who was 23 years old. He wrote that he had made inquiries about Nolan Kessler, and that the young man was a pressman with no property, no prospects, and no people. He wrote that he had not spent his life climbing out of a trade to watch his only daughter climb back down into one. He wrote that if she went through with the June wedding, her name would come off everything he owned, and that she should not mistake this for an argument, because he did not intend to have one. The last line took the wind out of me. He wrote that he was not a cruel man, that this was for her own protection, and that one day she would thank him. She married my father that June anyway, and Emmett Doyle did exactly what he said. 11 years. She was 23 when he wrote that letter and 34 before he spoke to her again. And the thing that finally moved him was not a birth or a holiday or an apology. It was my father dying. He put her back on the documents 4 months after Nolan Kessler's funeral. Bobby confirmed it later, in a flat voice, like a woman who had been waiting 30 years for somebody to ask. There is a note in that tin, too, on the back of a business card, in his handwriting. It must have come with the paperwork. 3 words. You should have listened. My mother had been the girl at the other end of that dining room table. Almost the same sentence, at almost the same age, from a man who never raised his voice either. And she had won. She married him anyway. She paid 11 years for it. Then she spent the next 30 proving her father right, the only way she knew how, which was by becoming him. She was not doing to me what had been done to her because she had forgotten how it felt. She was doing it because it had worked on her. In her ledger, 11 years of nothing had ended in a house in Shaker Heights, and she had never let herself do the arithmetic on the middle. She was awake the next afternoon, and she saw the tin on the chair before she saw me. She did not ask if I had read it. She closed her eyes for a second. Then she talked for almost an hour, and it was the first hour of her life she spent telling me the truth. She told me about those 11 years. Not poor the way people mean it, she said. She and my father always ate. It was the erasing that did it. Cousins who stopped calling, a club with suddenly no room. Her own mother writing to her twice a year in secret because a man in that house had decided she was gone. She said she learned one thing in those years and learned it all the way down. Money does not leave you. People leave and money stays, and if you have enough of it, they come back. She said she thought she was buying me a life where nobody could do that to me. I told her that what she called security was a rope with the length measured out, and that she had called it love. I told her being loved for who you are is the only kind that holds, and she had never once given me that, and my mother started to cry. Not the angry kind I had seen twice in my life. The other kind, she said she knew. She said she had known a long while and had nowhere to put it. I did not tell her it was all right, because it was not. I moved the tin off the chair, sat down, and held her hand, and we stayed like that until it got dark. She asked to meet Ezra properly. Not in passing in a hallway, properly. I brought him on a Saturday when she was sitting up and had asked a nurse to do something with her hair. He did not get 2 words out before she went first. She told him she had come to his shop. She said what she had put on the bench and what she had asked him, plainly, without softening any part of it. And she did not look at me once while she did it. She said she had thought about that afternoon every night since she landed in that bed. Ezra listened to the end. Then he told her he had burned it, that it was over as far as he was concerned, and he asked her how she was sleeping. They talked for an hour after that. She asked him how long a violin takes. He said around 200 hours if he is not interrupted. She was quiet a while, and then she said she had known a man once who measured his work in hours like that. She did not say the name. She did not have to. Curtis Mabry called 10 days later. My mother wanted both of her children back in the trust. I went to the hospital and told her what I wanted instead. I did not refuse it out of pride. Pride already cost me 20 years. I told her to put my share into a scholarship at the trade school on the near west side, where my father learned to run a press. Tuition and tools for people going into the building trades, named for him. She said yes before I finished the sentence. Then she asked Curtis to add a second name to it, which I had not asked for and would not have asked for. Emmett Doyle. She said her father had been a carpenter for 19 years before he was ever a rich man, and that nobody in this family had said that out loud since 1981. And it was time somebody did. Theo took the call about the trust and said thank you and did not fly back. I want to be honest about that, because a story like this wants to end with everybody at one table. He talks to her now. Once a month, 15 minutes, polite, asks after her medication, says goodbye. He told me he was glad for me and meant it, and that he was not going looking for something that had not been there in 16 years. 16 years is 16 years. There are things money cannot walk back. And she lives in that house knowing it. She came to our place for dinner in May. She brought a box. Inside it was the hand plane. And she put it in Ezra's hands and said the handle did not wear down like that from sitting in a tin. Somebody's palm did that. Over years. She said it belonged in a shop. It is on the 3rd shelf above his bench now. He uses it. 3 months later, she called and asked me to a benefit downtown. And it was the same night Ezra and I already had plans, and I said no. Then I sat there with the phone against my ear and my whole body braced, waiting for the tone I had been trained on since I was 11 years old. She said all right. She asked if lunch the next week would work instead. That was the moment I believed it. Not the crying, not the apology, not the paperwork. A no that cost me nothing. We are not fixed. She still says things that come straight out of the old woman, little remarks about Ezra's hours or somebody's daughter who married well. The difference is that when I name it, she stops, and she gets it right the next time about half of the time. Half the time is not nothing. Half the time is a whole new life compared to what I had. For 37 years, I thought there were exactly 2 doors. Do what she says and keep my name on the paper, or walk out and lose all of them at once, the way Theo did. There was a third one. It is narrower than either, and it does not stay open by itself. You hold it open with both hands, every week, by saying the true thing out loud in a calm voice and then not moving. And here is the part I did not expect. The part I still turn over. I do not miss the mother I had. I never did. What I grieve is the one she could have been. And the thing I cannot get past is that woman was in there the whole time. She was sitting in a fruitcake tin in a basement, under a letter from 1979, and not one person in this family ever had the nerve to take the lid off and read it out loud. So let me ask you something before you go. If the person who once made you choose between the one you loved and everything you were promised called you tonight, at 11:47, from a hospital, would you pick up? I know what I did. I am still not sure it was right. Tell me what you would do, down in the comments. And if you want to stay for the next one, subscribe, and I will see you there.